Bonjour à vous et merci de vous joindre avec moi aujourd'hui à notre série sur les principes fondamentaux de la gestion financière. Aujourd'hui, ensemble, on regardera et on va découvrir les comptes publics du gouvernement du Canada. Donc, je suis heureuse d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui pour une troisième série qui vous est offerte du Bureau du contrôleur général. Probablement que la majorité d'entre vous m'avez déjà vu sur nos deux autres séries préliminaires, mais juste au cas où, mon nom est Jocelyne Charon. Je suis la directrice exécutive du développement de la collectivité et je suis assise au sein du Bureau du contrôleur général. Ça me fait un grand plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Avant de débuter, je vais faire une petite reconnaissance territoriale. Donc, je tiens à souligner que je me joins à vous depuis le territoire traditionnel non cédé de la nation Algonquin-Anishinaabe. Comme beaucoup d'entre vous, vous nous rejoignez de différents endroits du pays. Donc, on a probablement des gens qui se joignent de nous de la province de la Colombie-Britannique, possiblement de Terre-Neuve, le Yukon. Donc, je vous invite aussi à prendre un moment pour reconnaître et honorer le territoire autochtone traditionnel sur lequel vous vous trouvez. So it's a pleasure to be here today with you and at our third session. And this time we are exploring the public accounts of the Government of Canada. I'm going to say it's one of the richest data sets we have about financial transactions, financial insights, and about telling Canadians and parliamentarians about how government have spent their taxpayers' money and some of the results that we received for the spending. So they're tabled in Parliament. There's often a lot of parliamentary questions related to this. There's a lot of insights and a lot of interest by some of our senior leaders. Public accounts have to be approved when we're looking at your respective departments by your accounting officers, so you're often your deputy heads. A huge role for the financial management community in terms of the integrity, the quality of the accounts, as well as the narratives that goes with it. So we have a privilege of having some experts with us today, and we hope that you'll find this session interesting. It is a bilingual session. So we'll have some segments in French and some segments in English. And I will try to make sure that I forewarn you when we're switching in one of the two languages. But you do have the interpretation services that can accompany you throughout. And you have access through the interpretation services of the platform. And you can select there the language of your choice. But I'll try to make sure that you know a little bit when we're switching so you can anticipate. We're also using WooClap today. So this is our interactive session or interactive way for you to reach us. We have a Q&A segment. And so question and answer segment, and you have here on the screen the code. So you can go to the WooClap website and enter this code that will allow you to send us your question. And please do that throughout. We have some time at the end of the session to go through that. As well, you can access the reference material. They are located in the reference section of the platform. Donc, je vous invite aussi à aller regarder les références disponibles. Elles sont disponibles dans les deux langues officielles et en plus de juste la présentation d'aujourd'hui, on a aussi ajouté du matériel additionnel sur les comptes publics. Donc, probablement pour vous, je vous dirais des ressources quand même intéressantes et riches à garder comme matériel de référence dans votre rôle. Donc, pour la session d'aujourd'hui, on a deux conférenciers principales et aussi suivi des discussions. Donc, on va faire un peu une session plus de littératie et ensuite aller vraiment approfondir avec une conversation et aussi la portion de questions-réponses qui est une opportunité pour vous un peu d'aller apprendre de nos experts. Donc, avant de commencer, on a demandé à mon patron, Martin Cummins, qui est l'assistant contrôleur général de la fonction financière pour le gouvernement du Canada, de vous donner des mots d'ouverture. Donc, vraiment, l'opportunité, c'est un peu de décrire la façon que lui voit les comptes publics et pourquoi c'est un exercice tellement important et qu'est-ce qui est en fait important pour vous d'apprendre et où une richesse un peu sur la fonction financière et le rôle en ce qui a trait aux comptes publics. So, I'm switching to English now and I'm asking Martin to come and give a few opening remarks. Thank you for being here with us today, Martin.
Great. Thank you, Jocelyn, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Crumans, and it is a pleasure to join you for the third session of the Financial Management Essentials series. I definitely want to thank the Canada School of Public Service for organizing this event and creating a space for us to learn, share, and grow as a community. Today, we're focusing on a cornerstone of financial transparency, the Public Accounts of Canada. These accounts are more than numbers. They are the official record of how public funds are spent. They represent truth and trust in government financial management, and they are essential for accountability to Canadians. As financial professionals, continuous learning is vital. Our field is dynamic, policies change, technology advances, and expectations from Canadians evolve. Staying current means leading with confidence and agility, and sessions like this help us strengthen our skills and ensure we're ready to meet new challenges. So I began my career as a financial officer, and I've worked in departments including Fisheries and Oceans, Treasury Board, Secretariat, and the Public Health Agency of Canada, where I worked during the pandemic that we all worked through. That experience reinforced a lesson I've carried throughout my career. Financial management is about trust and truth, principles at the heart of the public accounts. The public accounts are Canada's official consolidated financial statements, the definitive record of how public funds are spent. Audited and published for all Canadians, they reflect transparency, accountability, and stewardship. So think of them as Canada's financial report card, showing what was delivered, not just what was planned. In a world of forecasts and estimates, the public accounts are the final word. And they're not just for accountants. Ministers and deputy ministers use them as a key accountability tool. Canadians look to them as a measure of trust. And for financial officers, while they may feel like a reporting burden, they represent our commitment to integrity and sound management. Today, discussions connect directly to the Financial Management Competency Compass, which outlines the competencies needed for excellence in our field. The public accounts align closely with 5 key competencies: situational awareness, understanding the context and implications of financial decisions; communication, which is explaining complex financial information clearly and effectively; collaboration, which is working across teams and departments to achieve shared goals; financial literacy, interpreting and applying financial policies with confidence; and finally, compliance, upholding standards, policies, and legal requirements with integrity. So these competencies, they're not just theoretical, they guide how we work every day. They help us navigate complexity, manage risk, and build trust in the financial systems Canadians rely on. We're fortunate to have an excellent group with us today to explore these themes in depth. I look forward to learning from our speakers and from all of you as we continue to strengthen a trusted financial community, one that Canadians can count on. With that, I'll turn it over to introduce our 2 speakers. We will first hear from John Daly, a Senior Director here at the Office of the Comptroller General. John leads government-wide accounting policy initiatives, ensuring alignment with public sector standards and best practices. With extensive experience in central agencies, John advises on complex accounting issues, supports financial reporting frameworks, and promotes transparency in government operations. He's also held roles in federal departments and crown corporations. Later on in the session, we will hear from Melanie Boisvert, who is a Senior Director responsible for the public accounts at the Receiver General for Canada. Her team has the critical role of supporting the Receiver General in preparing and publishing the Public Accounts of Canada, which is the government's annual financial report in accordance with sections 63 to 65 of the Financial Administration Act. This includes maintaining accurate financial records, ensuring robust internal controls, and providing audit support to uphold the integrity of consolidated financial statements. So once again, thank you for joining us for this important discussion today, and over to you, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's John Daly. I'm very excited to be here with you today. I think what we're going to start with some WooClap questions to kind of get us going, and I'll give a little bit of an introduction of myself, as well as provide an overview of what our objectives are for the day. So I think we're already starting to get some results in from the WooClap question, but as an introduction, as we're going through that, so my name is John Daly. I am the Senior Director of Public Accounts and Advisory Services at the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. I have approximately 20 years of experience in reporting for governments and for government crown corporations. So this includes the preparation of consolidated financial statements, as well as working with departments, agencies, and other stakeholders in terms of advising on the appropriate application of accounting standards. I think one thing that's incredibly exciting here today is that I've been told, I think we have approximately 2,000 people who've actually subscribed to this event. So I really want to take this moment before we get further in just to thank you for taking your interest in the public accounts. It's something that holds dear to my heart. So again, thank you very much for coming and being here with us today. So we'll start by looking at maybe the results of the first kind of woo clap question, which is related to which community best describes your role? So, quelle communauté décrit le mieux votre rôle? So, very interesting to see the results here that we have a very large contingent of individuals from the financial management community. So, thank you very much for being here, as well as some members from procurement, internal audit, as well as others. So, we'll give it maybe a few more seconds for the results to come in. But essentially what we wanted to discuss here is, regardless of what community you're a part of, be it within the financial management community, the procurement community, internal audit, your roles touch the public accounts in one way or the other. And even if you're within the other category, if you're a policy analyst or if you work in communications, technology, what have you, everything that we do, be it through the objectives that we have as departments, results in expenses. And those expenses are then compiled within the public accounts of Canada. So again, very happy to see a good contingent of the financial management community in here. Really looking forward to giving you a bit more of an update on what's included in the public accounts. I'm not sure if we have an opportunity to see the other woo clap questions, so maybe we'll give it a second for that one to come through. Again, this question asks, how would you assess your level of knowledge of the public accounts of Canada? So, comment évaluerez votre niveau de connaissance des comptes publics du Canada? So I'm very curious about this one because I'm going to try to adjust my presentation a little based on kind of where we fall within this question.
John,
I think,
yes?
yes?
I think it's safe to say that no one other than Mehdi Merani has as much knowledge than you both of you have. I think I would get like a D if you sent me to school on the public accounts in comparison to you, that you should ace this.
It's definitely, it can, and we'll get into this in the presentation. That's a great point. And it can look overwhelming, the public accounts, especially when we start going into the details and what's involved and all the departments, agencies, crown corporations, other government organizations. It can seem overwhelming, but I think really the way that the public accounts are set up, we'll get into this, is that it's very scalable. Like you could really kind of go from one place to the other, and where you want to go and where you want to find the information, it's all there. So I think this is a very good turnout. I'm seeing, a mix between moderate, limited, and none, and a couple of those who have very high knowledge. So I think those who are under the high category, I'm going to ask you to send me an email, and you can actually do the second half of this presentation on my behalf. But no, joking aside, we're looking forward to going through and having a great presentation. So this is a great turnout. I'm very, very happy to see the level that we have in terms of knowledge, because our presentation is going to be focused those that have moderate, limited, or ultimately no knowledge on the public accounts. Okay, that's great. Very wonderful presentation. Maybe let's move to the objective slide. So ultimately, the objectives of today's session are going to be to ultimately understand the public accounts and their importance, to explore the structure and key accounting policies of the public accounts, as well as the ability to navigate and the usage of the public accounts. So to summarize, why is it important? What is in it? And how do I find and how do I use it? So I'll be focusing on the importance of the public accounts, where my colleague Melanie will give you more of an introduction of detailed information of what's included in there, as well as how to navigate and how to use it. Okay, so let's start. Let's go right to the next slide. So essentially, what are the public accounts? So as Martin said, they are the government's report card essentially on spending. It is the financial results for the government as a whole for the year ending March 31st. It includes over 100 departments and agencies, 60 crown corporations and other government organizations that are all consolidated into one set of financial statements that people can review and revise as a whole. It contains 3 separate volumes, about 2,500 pages of information, or grosso modo, 80,000 different numbers. And I actually haven't counted the numbers myself, but I do want to say that it is a very large amount of detailed information. And not to use props in terms of my presentations, but if you were to take a look at the printed copy of the public accounts, it is about that big. So essentially, I would argue to say that it is arguably likely to be the most comprehensive set of financial statements that exist within this country. I'm biased because I also work on that team, but that is my opinion. So that's a lot of information. So ultimately, how is it presented? And I think that's a great question to kind of think about. It is presented in 3 separate volumes. The first volume contains what is called the Financial Statement Discussion and Analysis, which is management's commentary on the results for that year. It includes the consolidated financial statements of the Government of Canada, like I said, the combination of all 100 departments and agencies and over 60 Crown corporations. And it includes supplemental detailed information that is tied to those financial statements. It follows what's called accrual-based accounting, which means that we need to record revenues when they are earned and record expenses when they are incurred, regardless of when cash is received or when cash is paid. Volume 2 includes details of information by ministries and by departments. In other words, it shows appropriations, which are monies provided by Parliament, revenues, such as taxes received, or other revenues, such as passport revenue or policing services, and it includes expenditures, which includes mostly what we have of our transfer payments or monies paid, which are monies paid to provinces, territories, or persons directly. This volume follows what is called a modified cash accounting, which means that transactions are recorded primarily when cash is paid or received during the year. And this ties very close to our expenditure management cycle from an appropriation perspective, with certain adjustments that are required for year-end payables, receivables, or other types of specified adjustments. Finally, we have Volume 3. Volume 3 is a compilation of additional data, either required by the Financial Administration Act or been previously reported. Examples I could provide: it provides information about revolving funds and revolving fund financial statements. It provides details on professional and special services, as well as items such as ministerial office expenditures. So it's additional detailed information that's not necessarily required by a public sector set of accounting standards, but is either required by the Financial Administration Act or historically reported on. It is actually a very popular volume because it includes details such as money spent on consultants, write-offs of debt, or even if you've lost a cell phone, it winds up in the Public Accounts of Canada. So it's, like I said before, very detailed set of information. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So, after what it is, let's focus on the who and the why. So why? Why do we have the Public Accounts of Canada? And it's easily said, it's required by law. So we have a Financial Administration Act, and the Financial Administration Act explicitly states that the government is to produce the Public Accounts of Canada, including the Government of Canada's consolidated financial statements, and that set of consolidated financial statements is to be audited by the Office of the Auditor General. And we'll talk a little about roles and responsibilities in a little bit. Otherwise saying, the public accounts are one of the government's key documents regarding financial accountability. It contains the financial results of the government as a whole, and those results are independently verified by the Office of the Auditor General. In fact, the Office of the Auditor General was created originally for the purposes of auditing these financial statements. As you may know, their role has evolved since then to also include things called performance audits, but that's not part of today's discussion. So we'll stay focused on the Public Accounts of Canada. So we're very proud to say that the Government of Canada has received an unqualified audit opinion on their consolidated financial statements, which means that an independent third party believes that in all material aspects, that our financial statements are complete and fairly presented. In other words, the results are the results, and politicians, the media, the public, all can be at ease knowing full well that when we present this information, that they can be relied upon for decision-making purposes. So that's incredibly important, and it definitely is what I am very proud of as working here within the Office of the Comptroller General, is that having this many years, 27 straight years of unqualified audit opinions, is actually quite rare on a global scale. So it's something certainly that we as a country should certainly be proud of. So in addition to knowing that the results are complete, users can then use these results to measure to see to what extent we raise revenues relative to what expenses we incur. They are used by parliamentarians, central departments, rating agencies, the media, the public in general, researchers, and even the results of our public accounts are used to secure debt financing with our Securities Exchange Commissions. So it has a multitude of purposes. Ultimately, you can really use the public accounts to review a multitude of different things. So say, for example, you're curious to what point has Canada made investments in other organizations? Well, that information is the public accounts of Canada. How much money did the government spend on the health transfer to provinces and territories? That information is available in the public accounts of Canada. And as we said before, and Melanie, I believe, will provide more detail on this, it's all presented in a scalable, easy way to find and available all in one comprehensive set. So if we want to look at the next slide, just want to provide a little bit of context for you in terms of results. Now, these are the results of the previous year's public accounts of Canada, which were published approximately a month ago. And one thing I want to do before we get into that is just clarify what I spoke about when I spoke about the OAG's role. So, and I think what's incredibly important, because as we talked about before, there are multiple volumes within the public accounts of Canada, but the Office of the Auditor General provides an audit opinion on the consolidated financial statements alone. The other information is provided to us by departments and agencies. So to provide a bit of context, the audit opinion is essentially on about 70 pages of that 2,500 pages that I spoke about. So ultimately, the audit opinion contains, it's hard to see with my camera, so I apologize, but it only contains a section of what the overall item is audited upon. However, because a lot of the financial information relies on that audit and everything else is supplemental to what's included in those consolidated financial statements, it is something that we could truly still rely on and have pride in to know that those numbers are accurate and that those numbers are correct. Okay, so on this slide, we're going to talk about the results. So I just wanted to present this slide to you. I know there's lots of pie charts and information here, but it's just to give you some context in terms of like how big are the public accounts of Canada from a dollar-wise perspective. So ultimately, to better understand our country's financial statements, as at March 31st of 2025, the government had $789 billion worth of assets on its balance sheet. That is made up of items such as buildings, vehicles, boats, loans, cash, like anything that you would imagine that would fit on a balance sheet. That's what's included in our balance sheet. We also have $2.2 trillion worth of liabilities. In other words, monies that the government of Canada owes, either to third parties, to employees, other countries. That's exactly what exists. So for the most part, we carry a lot of our liabilities in what's called unmatured debt. It's monies that we've raised to fund the government's operations. It also includes items such as accounts payable or even our public sector pension plans. Overall, we currently have a deficit of $1.3 trillion. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the amount of assets we have is less than our liabilities. So overall, the government is running an accumulated operating deficit. And that deficit, as I said before, is approximately $1.3 trillion. In terms of an annual context, last year, we had revenues of approximately $498 billion. And that amount is made up mostly of personal tax, corporate tax, other taxes and duties. And we had $534 billion worth of expenses. which include items such as transfers to persons, provinces, and territories. So, for example, health transfer, equalization transfer, employment insurance, all of those come at a cost. And that is what makes up a large portion of what we spend as a country. We also have other things such as interest charges on our debt. So we can't have debt without having to pay for it. So we have interest charges on our debt and other expenses such as personnel or potentially environmental cleanup costs that we've accepted, costs to retire our assets at the end of their useful lives. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we've brought in about 500 billion total in expenses and spent about 530 billion. So what that means is that at the end of this last year, the government had spent approximately 36 billion more than what it brought in, adding $36 billion to our overall deficit. So I just wanted to share that for your information because I thought that would just kind of help contextualize kind of ultimately, grosso modo, how big are these statements. So we want to move to the next slide. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about before we get into that is that, the public accounts is a key accountability document. I just showed you, I was able to explain exactly how much money was brought in relative to how much expenses was in the previous year. But it also is a key accountability document that fits in with a whole bunch of other reports that exist. So the Public Accounts of Canada isn't the only report that exists. And I'll provide some examples more for contextual purpose to see kind of where the public accounts fits in relation to some of these other reports. I'm not an expert on these other reports, so if you have lots of questions about them, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask the question to, but if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. So essentially, what we have is we have a budget. So that's now in the fall now. It used to be in the spring, but we have a fall budget. Within the budget, the federal government presents its annual plan that outlines how much money it will bring in and how it intends to spend in order to achieve its objectives. It includes a budget that actually is used in the Public Accounts of Canada, of which we compare our financial results to. So usually when you hear the presentation of the budget and they announce, say, the government was on budget or off budget, those results are actually the Public Accounts of Canada's results. Other areas we have is there's a main estimates process. The main estimates process provides detailed spending plans that gives departments the authority to use funds for the upcoming year. And these are based on programs already approved by the Government of Canada. Included in those areas are what's called departmental plans. Departmental plans provide details in which how departments aim to achieve the objectives in which they've been provided. Usually it contains target measures and in which will be later measured upon in the departmental results report. Throughout the year, we also have supplementary estimates. So it's called supplementary estimates A, B, and C. This provides departments the opportunity to re-seek authority 3 times throughout the year. In order for finding approval of these supplementary estimates processes, we have Appropriation Acts. So Appropriation Act is an act that's passed by law to officially give the legal authority for departments to spend money. Finally, at the end of the year, departments have what are called departmental results reports. And departmental results reports include commentary on how departments met their objectives per their departmental plan. It also includes what are called departmental financial statements, which our team provides guidance and support on. And what that is a set of financial statements that exists at the departmental level, so at a greater level of detail than what you'd see in the consolidated version of the Public Accounts of Canada. So that's ultimately where the Public Accounts fits in. It is essentially the final document, or one of the final documents in this expenditure management cycle that includes a consolidated view of all the revenues brought in and all the expenses made. So now we're at roles and responsibilities. So who is involved? And I'm going to go right around the corner. I'm going to end with you, with the ministers and with departments, organizations, and crown corporations. So first of all, there's the Office of the Comptroller General, the team that I'm a part of. Our team is responsible for government-wide financial functional leadership on accounting standards, departmental financial statements, and the Public Accounts of Canada. There's a good woo-clap question that maybe could have been had about how big do we think the team within the Office of the Comptroller General is in relation to providing that guidance. And just think about it, maybe think of a number of your head, 50, 100, 20, 6. The answer is about 20. So we're not a very big team, but we're a mighty team. We have the Department of Finance, who drafts the financial statement discussion and analysis. They prepare the budget, as you know, and they prepare what's called an annual financial report, which is a condensed version of our public accounts financial statements, and has many, many different uses, such as I said before, securing funding and the ability to borrow with security exchange commissions. We have the Receiver General of Canada, who is responsible to compile the data of those 100 departments and agencies and 60 Crown corporations and actually publish the public accounts in both official languages in a fully accessible HTML. Then we have the Office of the Auditor General, which is responsible for auditing the consolidated financial statements, providing an audit opinion on the audits of Crown corporations and other specified organizations, and also to publish what is called the commentary on the financial audits. Finally, we have the President. The President tables the public accounts with the Minister of Finance. The President of the Treasury Board publishes or tables the public accounts within the House of Commons, as well as works with the Minister of Finance to determine the form and content of the public accounts. Lastly, departments, Crown corporations, and other organizations, that's you. So ultimately, you are the most important. You are the most important kind of cadre in all of these roles and responsibilities. It is because departments, agencies, and Crown corporations are ultimately responsible for all of the transactions that they record within their departments. So it really, ultimately, without the work within the financial communities and all those that support the financial communities, there's no way that the public accounts would be possible. So thank you. Okay, let's go to the next slide because I appreciate we're running a little low on time. So ultimately, what did we want to get across here is, so how does the OCG, the Office of the Comptroller General, provide support? Well, the best place to start is with the policy on financial management. So the policy on financial management provides basically the cornerstone of the roles and responsibilities when it comes to financial management, as well as the creation of financial statements, as well as determining who is responsible ultimately for what. And it is clear within that policy, and you might think it's the chief financial officer, but no, actually it's not. It is the deputy minister of each department that is the accounting officer for your organization. And they have the responsibility, like I said before, in the roles and responsibilities, they have the responsibility for ensuring that the transactions that are recorded are accurate and in accordance with accounting standard. In fact, departments and agencies must advise OCG of the Office of the Comptroller General, our office, of any significant or unusual transactions. From policy, we have a directive, and the directive is called the Directive on Accounting Standard. And the Directive on Accounting Standard makes it clear that for the creation of our financial statements, we are to follow a set of accounting standards called the Public Sector Accounting Standards, which are published by the Public Sector Accounting Board. This group is an independent third party that provides the rules of engagement for the creation of our financial statements. It tells you how to recognize things, when to recognize, how to recognize, and what to disclose. We supplement that information with what's called the Government of Canada Accounting Handbook. So this specific book provides additional guidance and information for departments and agencies and Crown corporations to use in terms of deciphering various aspects of public sector accounting standards. It provides advice when there's a policy options are available, as well as detailed guidance on items such as capitalization of capital assets, which we won't go into a lot of detail on. Finally, we have a lot of guidance. So there's a lot of guidance that our team prepares in terms of helping departments and agencies not only help us produce the Public Accounts of Canada, but also to produce your own departmental financial statements. This includes illustrative departmental financial statements. We've got coding guides. We have guidance on specific standards. It is really all available to you. And if you don't know where to find it, you can email me directly and I will send you the link. Okay, so I think we're wrapping up on time soon. So I want to finish off my last slide. I hope I've have kind of given you a good overview of what it is and why it's important. But I thought this was actually a very interesting slide, just for everyone to appreciate just how old or how much of an institution the public accounts is, because the public accounts actually followed the year of Confederation. So as a country, we entered Confederation in 1867. And by the following year, we had our first public accounts. So it's actually great to be part of a tradition that's well over 150 years old. So I won't go into a lot of further detail on these items, but there's been an evolution of the public accounts over the years, such as the introduction of the Office of the Auditor General. We've changed our financial reporting dates. We've introduced new volumes and additional information. We've adapted to technology over time in terms of making sure we got online, accessible, using all accessible, respecting all accessibility laws of information available for our public accounts. It's available in both official languages, and it really is a multitude of information. And I know my colleague Melanie will go into a little bit more detail about what's in those volumes, but this is kind of what I really wanted to cap off on, is that it's important. It is a key accountability document. It is large. It is scalable. It may look overwhelming, but it is actually very easy to review and get through and find what you're looking for. And it's incredibly important. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to thank you again for letting me come and speak, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, John. We see that you love the public accounts, and honestly, you share it with such ease. And I learned a lot listening to you as well. So takeaways as well. These are important for your deputies as they are the accounting officers. And because of the level of detail, granularity, integrity, John spoke to you about the standards that are there, the coding. So, and we'll speak about that in a little bit, but even financial officers or administrative officers that are coding travel claims or using training, or if you're picking professional services and it's not, these will kind of lead into those errors when you're looking at the consolidated data for your department, or ultimately into how that expense will translate into which category. And that's where we're trying to create those standards and alignment and consistency. So when you look at a number, we've interpreted it the same across the 105 federal department and agencies and Crown Work, so it can be meaningful when you're trying to tell that story to Canadians or parliamentarians or trying to inform even. So super interesting. Thank you very much. So we're going to lead into a bit of a panel discussion. So bringing in Melanie as well. So it's the public accounts are, I'm going to say, an important collaboration between you and the departments, the Office of the Controller General, so John and his team, as well as the Receiver General. So there's a bit of a tango that happens when you're submitting your trial balances, when the Receiver General will send, sometimes they'll send you error reports. All of those things have a reason. So we have kind of two of those experts now that are going to help us with some of the panel discussions, and as well ultimately into that transparency and integrity with the Auditor General. But John, so why is it important to Canadians to have access to the detailed financial information about their government? Like, I don't know. Shouldn't we just skip this whole thing?
No, I think that's a great question. I think number one, I'd say transparency and accountability is key, right? So, as ultimately, to put it simplistically, it's our tax dollars. So we as Canadians have a right to understand how that money is spent. By having a document like this that is audited by an independent third party, we really build on that transparency and accountability aspect. It really ensures the government is open on how public funds are managed, and it builds trust between citizens and its government institutions in terms of that degree of accountability. I think another thing I'd like to highlight with that too is really when it comes to democratic oversight. So we do live in a democratic institution, and like I said, it's all our tax dollars. So it's incredibly important that we're aware of that. So by having a consolidated view of all of the revenues and expenses of the government, we allow the Parliament, the media, the population as a whole to review, analyze, and scrutinize, if necessary, our spending and our revenue. And really what it does at the end of the day, in my opinion, it supports informed debates and decision-making. Because if we have one set where we can truly see what are the results, then we know where we're headed as a country.
That's very good. And as well, even the members that are part of the Public Accounts Committee receive training to make sure that when there is that conversation, that debate within the committee, there's a bit of that financial literacy that goes with it. Because we can understand, many of us on here are probably accountants, but some of the, our parliamentarians may not have our same, accounting literacy. So important for them to understand. And there is some complexity in there. It can be overwhelming, like John mentioned, when you're looking at the thickness and even the sheer volume of it. So there's just for you to know, that's something I learned sitting in the Office of the Comptroller General. So Mélanie, given the extensive nature of the public account, why is it important that we record each transaction appropriately? Like, how many transactions in the public account? Why does it matter which financial coding I pick?
Great question. So, John touched a bit on this when he talked about roles and responsibilities for departments and agencies and Crown Corps. The public accounts are essentially built on every transaction that is entered every day into the financial systems. So it's really important for that transparency piece that we appropriately choose the right financial authorities, that we pick the right coding so that we can report back on what was actually spent. Because if we pick the wrong coding, then we're giving the wrong indication as to where we spent our public funds. So for that accountability piece, it's really, really key. And we can't do the public accounts, or we can't have that integrity for the public accounts if each individual transaction is not entered properly.
Exactly. That's why we have those accounting standards. That's why we have the coding manuals. And that's why if you don't know where they are, you have to email John. Hopefully not, but maybe. I have two homework for the audience. The first one is we're going to go to WooClap to ask you a question. So you can kind of go and take a peek right now and start to answer the question, because that's going to help us in that next conversation. But I also wanted to invite you to join the chat so you're able to ask us some questions. We have a Q&A segment at the end, but you need to join the chat to be able to interact with us and ask us your questions. So you have homework as we continue down this conversation. I have another question for you, John. How does the public account fit into the overall reporting cycle on government spending? You had a little bit of that chart about, or that explanation, right? So it kind of sits at the end, or maybe at the beginning too.
No, I think that's another great question. So again, yes, if you look at the detailed information within the detailed slides that we provided, there actually is a slide within that deck that walks through kind of a very high level look at the expenditure management cycle. And it's something that we touched on a little bit during the presentation. Is that absolutely, Jocelyn, you're correct. It does sit at ultimately I see it at the end of the expenditure management cycle. You start off with a budget, which basically is the government's plan for spending. And then you finalize with the public accounts, which is a report on what was your spending for the previous year. And what a great accountability aspect with the public accounts provides you is actually in the public accounts, we provide that comparison between what was the forecasted annual operating deficit relative to what the actual results were. And that's a great tool that Canadians and the public can quickly use and pinpoint to say, were we within plan, or was there something else that happened that makes us have to rethink about, well, what was the plan and then what happened? Because the world is a complicated place, and the government is a very large, complicated set of different organizations, and having that consolidated view is incredibly important. So ultimately, yes, you're right at the end.
Right at the end. And then as well, through the public account, we kind of officially will provide the financial position for the government, right? So are we in a deficit or a surplus? But that information is also used to do a little bit of that fiscal update, right? To kind of understand where we sit to inform the next cycle, the next budget cycle. Am I correct in saying so?
Absolutely right. So ultimately, at the end of the day, like there's always talk of returning to fiscal balance, or returning to a positive number. Because I think as we brought forward with our results, like I did present the fact that the government of Canada currently has a $1.3 trillion deficit, and that a lot of that deficit has been influenced by how much the government did in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the amount of programs that the government introduced as a result of that pandemic was a reason why we've had an increase in our deficit. So you can see there's a clear correlation between the activities of the government and its associated deficits. So certainly, you're right. It could be certainly used as a tool to say, okay, well, what do we do as a country, to reduce that deficit going forward?
Exactly. So it's used for fiscal update and fiscal policy, or even informing kind of policy decisions about their next round of spending, right? So very important. And I didn't know that kind of is the only place that we'll find the official deficit or surplus number for our country, which I think is a really important number that probably a lot of our senior leaders are looking into, I'm going to say. Okay, so I'm going to switch over. So we have a segment coming up with Mélanie. So we're going to hear a bit of a different perspective on the public accounts. But firstly, we have a WCAP question that we had asked about who is responsible for publishing the public accounts of Canada. So you have a multiple choice question, and we want to see if people have it right.
And I think, Jocelyn, if you don't mind me jumping in, it was a bit of a trick question, I have to admit, because it is the president of the Treasury Board that tables the public accounts, but the actual publishing of putting it on our website is actually done by the Receiver General. So maybe it's a bit of a trick question.
I think so. Yeah. We are tricking the audience. Interesting. Okay, but then we're seeing if they're paying attention to those nuances. You are right that the president does table them. And it's just like literally a tabling as well, right? Depositing the book officially in committee. And then the publishing is the Receiver General. Interesting. Okay, which volume include the audited consolidated financial statements? That's the other WCAP question. So we're going to give you a moment to, Mélanie, is there something interesting we should tell the audience about the publishing? What happens in the publishing process?
Well, I mean, the publishing process is very extensive in the sense that we have different formats for the public accounts. So as you mentioned, we actually table physical books as part of the tabling. But then once that's done, we also provide an accessible HTML version. There's a PDF version as well. And if people want to download data from the public accounts, there's also data that's available on the Open Government portal. And people can do their own analysis on what happened and how the money was spent. So sometimes universities actually download these data sets, and they kind of supplement their own research that they're doing on the public sector.
Interesting. So we make it accessible to Canadians or whoever is interested in looking at some of the spending for Government of Canada. Interesting. And to the question we asked about which volume, so I think John showed you of the big pile, there was only a few pages, or around 70 pages, right, John, that you mentioned that were actually the audited part. So the question was which volume, and the audience is getting it pretty much right here on volume 1, so 76%. I think they were listening to you, John. That's very good news. We captured their attention, and they're getting high grades as part of our quiz. I'm happy to see. Good job. C'est bon. So, on va changer un petit peu dans la langue française. So, changing here into French. So, for you, those of you that have to adjust your interpretation service. Donc, Mélanie, à toi pour le prochain segment des comptes publics. Puis, qu'est-ce qu'on se retrouve dans quel volume?
Merci, Jocelyne. Donc, John vous a déjà présenté, dans le fond, que les comptes publics sont publiés, dans le fond, en 3 volumes. Dans cette section-là, on va vraiment passer à travers des sections clés de chacun des volumes pour vous aider à vous guider si vous cherchez de l'information particulière par rapport à l'information financière. Donc, on commence. La première section, dans le fond, dans le volume 1, c'est l'analyse financière ou l'analyse des résultats. Donc, on prend l'information qui est publiée dans les états financiers et on la contextualise. Donc, on parle des montants réels, puis ça nous permet de donner un peu une idée sur la performance du gouvernement par rapport à ses plans. Ensuite, on va regarder certains indicateurs plus économiques, comme la croissance du produit intérieur brut, l'inflation, les tendances pour l'emploi. Puis on va contextualiser les résultats dans cette vue ou cette loupe-là. Ce qui veut dire analyse, on ne peut pas parler d'analyse sans parler de risque nécessairement. Donc, on va parler de certains risques budgétaires, certains risques stratégiques qui vont peut-être influencer les résultats dans le futur. Et puis, pour terminer, on va mettre ça sur une tendance de 10 ans. Donc, on va regarder, dans le fond, sur une vue de 10 ans, quelles sont les tendances en termes de dette, revenus, de dépenses. Donc, ça nous permet de vraiment voir comme un portrait global de la situation. Donc, section 1 du volume 1, ça permet de contextualiser, de dire l'histoire, dans le fond, derrière les états financiers qui vont être présentés dans la prochaine section. Donc, prochaine diapo. Donc, la prochaine section dans le volume 1, c'est la section 2. Donc, c'est ici que, dans le fond, vous allez retrouver les états financiers consolidés pour l'exercice qui se termine au 31 mars. Donc, la première chose que vous allez trouver, c'est l'énoncé de responsabilité. Donc, dans le fond, c'est les hauts dirigeants, donc les signataires des états financiers, qui vont, dans le fond, signer une déclaration, qui sont responsables de produire les états financiers selon les normes comptables canadiennes pour le secteur public et dire, dans le fond, qui attestent qu'ils ont mis des contrôles rigoureux en place pour s'assurer de l'information financière. Ensuite, comme John nous l'a mentionné, c'est le bureau du vérificateur général qui fait la vérification des états financiers. Et puis, c'est dans cette section-là que vous allez trouver l'opinion, dans le fond, de la vérificatrice générale pour voir si on représente finalement les résultats du gouvernement canadien et puis s'ils sont conformes aux normes comptables. Donc, John l'a mentionné tantôt, mais ça fait 27 années consécutives qu'on représente fidèlement, dans le fond, les résultats aux Canadiens et aux parlementaires. Donc, c'est un accomplissement que pas beaucoup de pays peuvent se vanter. Ensuite, troisième section dans ce volume-là, prochaine composante clé, c'est les états financiers comme tels. Donc, c'est ici qu'on consolide, dans le fond, les informations des 170 organisations, je vais combiner les Crown Corp et les sociétés d'État avec les organismes, là, mais au total, à peu près 170 organisations. Et puis, on met aussi des notes explicatives pour mieux comprendre certaines informations qui sont présentées dans les états financiers. Prochaine diapo. Donc, on va changer de volume. On va parler du volume 2. Donc, le volume 2 est un peu différent du volume 1. Le volume 1, comme John a expliqué, c'est présenté sous la comptabilité d'exercice. Le volume 2, lui, va présenter une vue complètement différente et il va utiliser une comptabilité de caisse modifiée. Donc, une des sections clés qui va vous permettre de réconcilier un petit peu entre le volume 1 et le volume 2, c'est les tableaux sommaires. Donc ici, on fait vraiment un rapprochement entre les résultats présentés dans le volume 1 et le volume 2. Puis ça vous permet aussi d'avoir une vue d'ensemble sur comment les autorités budgétaires et non budgétaires ont été utilisées. Ensuite, on présente dans le fond les résultats par portefeuille ministériel. Donc, vous pouvez aller voir dans le fond quels ont été les revenus qui ont été générés, comment les fonds ont été alloués et dépensés, c'est quoi les paiements de transfert et les différents programmes pour chacun des ministères. Donc, ça vous donne vraiment une vue ministérielle sur les résultats qui ont été accomplis. Prochaine acétate. Donc, on nous demande souvent, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'informations dans les comptes publics, comment moi, à tous les jours, je peux me servir des comptes publics pour mieux comprendre ce qui se passe. Donc, nous, quand on a cette question-là, on pointe les gens vers le volume 2. Donc, si vous voulez mieux comprendre les opérations de votre ministère, vous pouvez aller voir les sections sur votre portefeuille ministériel et puis analyser un petit peu les résultats. Donc, vous pouvez regarder dans le budget qui vous donne un peu les dépenses qui étaient prévues, puis vous pouvez regarder dans le fond les dépenses réelles. Vous allez avoir aussi, comme j'ai mentionné, des informations sur les paiements de transfert, les différents programmes, les différentes autorités, quelles sortes de crédits qui sont utilisés dans votre ministère. Donc, c'est utile pour comprendre les opérations de votre ministère actuel, mais aussi intéressant si vous vous préparez pour une entrevue puis vous ne connaissez pas bien le ministère dans lequel vous allez, ça peut vous donner des indications clés sur comment fonctionne ce ministère. Prochaine acétate. Donc, le volume 3, comme John a mentionné, c'est de l'information complémentaire qui n'est pas ni dans le volume 1 ni dans le volume 2. C'est probablement le volume le plus consulté par les parlementaires et par les médias parce qu'il y a des informations un petit peu plus poussées ou peut-être un petit peu plus détaillées sur certaines choses. Donc, on va passer à travers les différentes sections clés pour ça. Donc, la section 2 donne l'information supplémentaire qui est exigée, dans le fond, par la loi de la gestion des finances publiques. Donc, c'est ici qu'on va retrouver, par exemple, le téléphone cellulaire que John a perdu tantôt. Dans son exemple, il va se retrouver dans la section 2 du volume 3. On va parler aussi des créances qui sont radiées ou renoncées, les différentes remises ou les pertes de fonds. Donc, s'il y a du vol, c'est ici que vous allez retrouver l'information à ce sujet-là. La section 3, dans le fond, ça, c'est pour les services professionnels. Donc, quelle expertise le gouvernement est allé chercher pendant cette année financière-là? Donc, tout contrat au-delà de 100 000 va être dans cette section. Vous allez pouvoir les retrouver ici. Même chose pour les paiements de transfert, c'est dans la section 6. Et puis, tout paiement de transfert de 100 000 et plus va être ici avec le bénéficiaire identifié. Section 8 est un peu différente. Donc, c'est ici qu'on va qu'on va retrouver les paiements de réclamation contre l'État, les paiements à titre gracieux, les montants jugés par la Cour. Donc, par exemple, quand il y a eu des montants qui ont été versés par rapport aux dommages liés à Phoenix, c'était dans la section 8 qu'on pouvait trouver cette information-là. Dans la section 10, ben, c'est là où on retrouve, dans le fond, les dépenses des cabinets ministériels, donc les services ou les salaires du personnel, les services professionnels qui ont été utilisés. Et si on voyageait dans le cadre de leur fonction, ben, vous allez pouvoir voir les coûts reliés à leur voyage ici. Donc, prochaine section. Donc, on a parlé, dans le fond, on fait un survol vraiment rapide là, des 3 volumes, les sections clés où vous pouvez trouver l'information. Mais comme vous pouvez vous imaginer, quand on a à produire de l'information consolidée pour 170 organisations, ça nécessite un petit peu de planification puis un bon calendrier à suivre. Donc, on va passer à travers un petit peu le calendrier de production pour les comptes publics. Donc, de novembre à mars, c'est vraiment notre période de planification. Donc là, on est en plein dans notre période de planification pour la production des comptes publics qui vont se terminer au 31 mars. Donc, ce qu'on fait ici, nous, le receveur général, on commence par faire notre plan directeur. Donc, c'est un plan avec toutes les activités, les livrables, les dates clés pour les agences centrales pour s'assurer qu'on respecte nos délais qui sont indiqués par la loi. On fait aussi une mise à jour des instructions pour les comptes publics. Donc, les instructions pour les comptes publics, c'est ici qu'on donne, dans le fond, des conseils et avis au ministère, aux organisations, comment nous fournir l'information afin de s'assurer qu'elle est complète, exacte et puis limiter, dans le fond, le nombre d'erreurs. On va aussi indiquer s'il y a eu des changements par rapport à l'année passée. On va aussi, conjointement avec le bureau du contrôleur général, faire une séance de fin d'exercice où les organisations vont pouvoir poser des questions un petit peu plus détaillées sur le calendrier, sur les changements qui ont lieu. Dans le fond, on revoit les instructions avec eux, puis on met en lumière certaines sections clés. On fait aussi la production des états financiers pro forma. Donc, lorsqu'il y a des changements, ça nous permet de voir qu'est-ce que les états financiers vont avoir l'air à la fin de l'année avec ce nouveau programme qui a été ajouté ou une nouvelle norme comptable qui vient en vigueur. Qu'est-ce que la coquille de nos états financiers, à quoi elle ressemble? Il y a aussi le plan de vérification qui va être présenté par le bureau du vérificateur général aux signataires des états financiers lors de la rencontre de protocole. Donc, cette année, cette rencontre-là va avoir lieu en mars. Ensuite de ça, on a tout ce qui est la période de collecte de données. Donc, de avril à mai, les organisations nous envoient l'information au receveur général. Donc, la balance de vérification finale, l'information pour les comptes publics, donc les formulaires et les plaques, et toute autre information requise pour les comptes publics. Ensuite de ça, c'est la préparation. Donc, de juin à août, on a une période de 3 mois pour consolider toute cette belle information-là, la valider et s'assurer qu'elle est conforme. Donc, c'est ici aussi qu'on va préparer les différentes ébauches qui vont être revues par le bureau du contrôleur général et vérifiées aussi par le bureau du vérificateur général. Lorsque tout a été complété, que les états financiers ont été vérifiés, C'est à ce moment-là que le bureau du vérificateur général s'assoit, dans le fond, avec les signataires des états financiers et présente, dans le fond, les résultats de la vérification. On signe aussi, à ce moment-là, l'énoncé de responsabilité dont on a fait mention, qui se retrouve dans le volume 1, et la lettre de déclaration centrale. Une fois ces documents-là signés, c'est là où la vérificatrice générale va émettre son opinion sur les états financiers de façon officielle. Par la suite, on prépare l'ébauche des comptes publics, l'ébauche finale, qui va être imprimée pour être déposée en chambre. En octobre, c'est là où on va signer la lettre de transmission pour les comptes publics avant le dépôt à la Chambre des communes. Et puis, normalement, les comptes publics vont être déposés. On vise toujours octobre-novembre, mais techniquement, par la loi, on a jusqu'au 31 décembre pour déposer les comptes publics. Prochaine diapo. Donc, le processus des comptes publics, c'est juste une autre vue, dans le fond, de l'information qu'on vient de présenter, qu'on vient de discuter dans le calendrier. Donc, la première partie, c'est la collecte de données. Donc, c'est s'assurer qu'on a des instructions qui sont claires, précises et qui vont épauler, dans le fond, les organisations pour nous soumettre l'information. Il y a toute la soumission de l'information, des plaques et des formulaires. Par la suite, il y a les ébauches puis la révision. C'est ici qu'on va faire l'assurance de la qualité. Donc, les informations qu'on reçoit par la balance de vérification et par les formulaires et les plaques, on les valide. Donc, on s'assure qu'il n'y a pas de différence entre ces informations-là. Donc, c'est beaucoup, beaucoup d'informations à valider. Il y a plus que de 6, je dirais, je vais arrondir, là, mais 6500 plaques qu'on doit revoir avant de pouvoir commencer à préparer à faire nos ébauches. Donc, c'est beaucoup, beaucoup d'informations détaillées à valider. Ensuite de ça, on prend toute cette information-là, on met ça dans notre outil de publication au receveur général et on produit les différentes ébauches qui sont revues par le Bureau du contrôleur général, par le ministère des Finances et puis, dans le fond, qui sont utilisées par le BVG pour valider, pour vérifier les états financiers. Donc, comme on a mentionné tantôt, il y a différentes version des comptes publics. Il y a la version papier qui est déposée à la Chambre des communes. Ensuite de ça, on a la version HTML qui est accessible. On a le PDF et puis les jeux de données. Et puis ces trois versions-là sont, dans le fond, publiées une fois que le dépôt a été fait à la Chambre des communes. Prochaine diapo. Donc, quelques petits conseils là, pour naviguer toute cette belle information-là. Donc, les versions dont je vous ai parlé se retrouvent, dans le fond, sur le site où on retrouve les comptes publics. La version PDF vous donne, dans le fond, un peu comme les signets là-dedans vont vous donner c'est un peu comme une table des matières interactive. Là. Fait que ça vous permet de naviguer d'une section à l'autre. Il y a aussi une fonction recherche là, qui peut vous permettre d'aller chercher une information vraiment spécifique rapidement, dans le fond, dans les comptes publics. La version HTML, mais dans le fond, on navigue en utilisant les liens, les hyperliens. Et puis, on peut aller facilement aussi consulter les notes à ce moment-là. Les jeux de données sont disponibles sur le portail du gouvernement ouvert et puis permettent de, dans le fond, télécharger de l'information qui est représentée dans les comptes publics pour faire de l'analyse supplémentaire, que ce soit au niveau, comme je disais tantôt, les universités se servent de ça pour un complément à leur recherche sur la fonction publique. Donc, ça apporte une autre vision des choses. Donc, en gros, ça fait le tour de ce que je voulais vous présenter.
Puis là, Mélanie, tantôt, on a parlé de comment gros c'était l'équipe de John. C'est comment gros ton équipe à toi qui prépare tout ça, puis les 6500 plaques que vous recevez, puis l'échéancier serré auquel vous devez faire face?
Bien, mon équipe est un petit peu plus grande que celle de John. On est à peu près une trentaine.
OK. Mais c'est quand même pas beaucoup quand on regarde un peu à l'ampleur de l'exercice, l'importance de l'exercice, puis aussi le niveau de détail d'intégrité qui doit être investi pour s'y rendre à un produit fini qui est de qualité, puis ultimement qui ne va pas recevoir des commentaires de la vérificatrice générale. Donc, c'est bon, super intéressant. J'échangeais avec mon équipe pendant vos segments, puis je disais combien j'apprenais de vous du segment. Donc, j'espère que ça a été aussi la même chose pour l'audience. J'ai une question, puis je pense que ça a été posé par le groupe. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il y a un échéancier autant serré? sais, il y a tout le temps, puis les ministères, on dirait qu'on n'a jamais assez de temps pour finaliser nos plaques, puis finaliser notre P12.1, P12.2, les ajustements après. Pourquoi, quand on regarde, là, tu sais, quand le ministère doit soumettre par rapport à quand finalement les comptes publics sont déposés?
Donc, dans le fond, les échéanciers sont serrés parce que, comme j'ai expliqué tantôt quand on présentait le calendrier, malgré qu'il y a quand même 6 mois qui se passent entre la fin d'exercice puis la publication, dans le fond, des états financiers, les ministères ont 2 mois pour nous soumettre l'information, mais dans le fond, la consolidation puis la validation de l'information se fait sur une période de 3 mois, qui n'est pas beaucoup. Puis en plus, il y a certaines complexités. Il y a certains estimés qui sont faits par rapport aux revenus fiscaux, par exemple, ou par rapport à la pension, qui sont assez complexes aussi. Donc, toute cette complexité de cette information-là fait en sorte que les échéanciers sont serrés, d'où l'importance de bien coder chacune des transactions financières parce que ça nous simplifie la tâche en bout de ligne.
Oui, pour
Pour
éviter les
valider
erreurs. Oui,
éviter les
exactement.
erreurs, valider l'information.
Exactement. Intéressant. OK, donc je vous avais expliqué tantôt, on avait 2 segments. Donc, John nous a un peu donné l'information à haut niveau. On a passé en détail sur chacun des volumes, leurs raisons, leur contenu avec Mélanie. Fait que là, on vient un peu à la dernière portion de notre segment qui est vraiment vos questions, les questions de l'audience. Donc, je vais passer à travers un peu ce qu'on a reçu. We'll hold this session a bit in bilingual format. So, if the question was asked to us in French, we'll answer in French. And if it was asked to us in English, we'll answer in English. And then we'll kind of do this in a little bit more organic way. I'll ask the question, and sometimes we may have John that is better positioned to answer, or sometimes Mélanie, or maybe both. So we'll kind of try to enlighten you a little bit and answer as much as we can so you can drive this knowledge home and make sure that after the session, you have a very solid understanding of why the public account, why it matters, what's in there, and what your role is in relation to that. So there was some Q&A about basically the public sector accounting standards, which are unique to the public service or to public sector. And then basically the general accepted accounting principle that you kind of learn at in university that are probably more for businesses. So maybe, John, can you tell us a little bit of the difference and if they follow the gap? Or the public sector accounting, does it follow GAAP?
Yep, no, it's a great question. So I guess the GAAP, as accountants use, stands for generally accepted accounting principles. So ultimately, generally accepted accounting principles is like essentially the generic term that's used. So really, in the country of Canada, we've got several different types of sets of accounting standards. So we have what's called international financial reporting standards, which are adopted across the globe, that are mostly used by private organizations that raise money on stock exchanges. We have something called accounting standards for private enterprises, or as what's called ASPE, which is a set of accounting standards designated for, again, private enterprises, but maybe not to the same degree of detail or rigor, which is included in national financial reporting standards. We have other items such as not-for-profit standards, but what we do have for the public sector are what's called public sector accounting standards. So they are a specific set of accounting rules designed for the uniqueness that is associated with being a public sector entity. So, what I would really take away from that is that if you really compare, our standards for public sector accounting relative to that of the private sector, the private sector is focused on profit, like the bottom line revenue generating capability of your organization. Whereas public sector accounting standards have more focus on what's called service potential. So what is it that is being brought in, and what is it being spent on? So there's a little bit of a different focus, and then there are certain areas such as guidance on transfer payments or guidance on appropriation or things like that you wouldn't normally see in the private sector. You do see in the public sector. So that's what those standards focus on.
That makes sense because the government business is unique, and probably private businesses don't have to, meddle in equalization payments, or as you're saying, transfer payments, for example. So we kind of need to provide some book of rules around what is unique in terms of the government spending and nature of activities. So that makes sense. But we don't make them up. There's a lot of due diligence and a lot of expertise and governance that goes to making sure that there's integrity behind the standards. So we had a question in terms of if there is going to be any revisions, like how often are these things revised?
So I guess it's a great question. So absolutely. So there is the Public Sector Accounting Board. So the Public Sector Accounting Board is an independent third party, not part of the government in any way or shape or form, that is responsible for the creation and publishing of public sector accounting standards, and they're constantly looking at ways to improve upon our set of accounting standards in order to make them more relevant and useful for users. So, for example, and we won't go into a lot of detail on it, but currently the Public Sector Accounting Board has published a new standard that will take an effect in the following fiscal year. So it will be effective as of April 1st of 2026, a new standard on financial statement presentation. So the very face of our financial statements will be different as of March 31st of 2027. So there'll be a lot of more guidance and information coming from our office on that in the near future.
I agree. So it's important for financial officers to stay up to speed and abreast of those changes on accounting standard, especially if you work in the accounting operations or in preparation of financial statements for your departments, right? So taking part in some of those training sessions that the Receiver General provides, or even some of the guidance that's provided by the OCG as well. So, John, we talked about volume 1 and volume 2 and the difference between cash accounting and accrual accounting. Can you provide a little bit more in terms of the challenges of those two methods, especially when you're talking maybe a parliamentarian that is not an accountant? And even for us sometimes in financial functions have maybe a difficulty in understanding why is one accrual and the other one cash?
Well, it's a great question, and you're right. It can be a little bit confusing at first if you're not truly aware of like what is the intent of the two different volumes. So the first volume does, you're right, focus on accrual based accounting, and the concept behind accrual based accounting is to get a full distinct picture of the revenues and the expenses associated with the government's operations, regardless of whether or not cash has actually left the door or not. So an example I could provide is that accrual accounting requires you to record the cost of your pension each year that you earn it. So even though those payments won't happen for potentially, depending on where you are in the retirement cycle, potentially for many, many years, we are incurring that expense now because we're providing that benefit. The difference with volume 2 actually looks at the financial results with a slightly different lens. So what volume 2 does, it allows users to review the results of each individual ministry and department relative to what it's received in appropriation. So it allows you to have a different look because appropriations are closer tied to the cash that leaves out the door. So that's ultimately the large difference between the two of those items, and that's how I look at it. So ultimately, it's two different lights.
Two different lights. So you'd say like volume 1 is more what we learned in university in terms of les chefs financiers. So you want to look at all of the assets and all the liabilities, including those future liabilities that have not yet materialized or the cash is still with us, to really kind of show the integrity of the financial situation for the business, if I can say it like that, versus the other one, you're kind of more looking at how the government has that whole expenditure management cycle and managing the money and the flow of cash, if you will. Does that make sense? Wait.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to make sure that, we translate the technical into the more ingestible for our people. There was a quick question on fraud, and I know that fraud is more prevalent, right? We hear of that. I think we have to do better in terms of fraud detection, fraud prevention, but ultimately it can happen. So a question was, where does it land in the public accounts? And does it get recognized as a loss?
So I'll take that question. So certainly. So information on losses can be found in Volume 3, Section 2, and it's broken up about different types of losses. So there's accidental loss, there's intentional loss, as well as information in relation to potential recollectability. So all that information is available in Volume 3, and it's actually quite a interested and sought out section of the public accounts, because people are clearly interested, in those types of figures, and there's different ways in which the government, extinguishes its debts, and that can be done through remissions or waivers, forgiveness, write-offs. So there's a lot of mechanisms that exist, and that goes kind of deep into like the legal side of how we treat these types of situations. So I won't go into a lot of detail there because I'll probably make a mistake, but certainly Volume 3, Section 2, that's where you want to go.
That's why, and hopefully that number is really small because we have a lot of fraud detection and prevention methods. And as well, there's a close tie to internal controls as it relates to fraud. We talked about that as our Learning Essentials series number 2 that we did in September. So for those of you that were there, hopefully you were listening. Mélanie, une question pour toi, un peu sur la modernisation des comptes publics. Comment on peut faire un peu pour raconter l'histoire aux Canadiens sur les dépenses, peut-être sur les outils même qui sont utilisés, la préparation? Qu'est-ce que le receveur général est en train de faire ou prévoit faire en ce qui a trait à peut-être un effort de modernisation, autant pour les ministères et peut-être même pour le traitement? Peux-tu nous expliquer un peu s'il y a des efforts, des pensées à ce sujet-là?
Oui, définitivement. Donc oui, effectivement, le receveur général est présentement en train de regarder comment moderniser ces différents systèmes qu'on utilise pour collecter l'information, dans le fond, qui est utilisée dans le cadre des comptes publics. Donc, présentement, pour cette collecte d'informations-là, on a 2 systèmes principaux qui sont utilisés. Donc, on a le système de production des comptes publics. Et puis, on a, dans le fond, puis là, je suis pas bonne fois, je regarde mes notes parce que je connais juste l'acronyme en anglais.
Le CFMRS?
Oui, c'est exactement ça.
Je ne sais pas en français.
Ah, c'est pas drôle. Je l'ai écrit quelque part parce que je me suis dit, ça va venir comme question. Mais bref, tout ça pour dire, donc on a présentement ces 2 systèmes-là. On regarde voir quelles améliorations qu'on peut apporter pour faciliter, dans le fond, la collecte d'informations. Mais par contre, pour les sociétés d'État, on reçoit encore l'information utilisant des fameuses spreadsheets Excel. Donc, on est en train de finaliser le développement d'un outil, d'un portail, dans le fond, qui va pouvoir être utilisé pour faciliter la transmission de l'information et la validation dès la soumission d'informations. Et on va pouvoir avoir l'attestation, dans le fond, des sociétés d'État directement dans le portail, ce qui va nous aider aussi pour peut-être raccourcir le temps que ça va prendre pour valider l'information qu'on reçoit de ces organisations-là. Donc, beaucoup de choses à venir, beaucoup de choses à développer. C'est certain qu'on veut essayer de voir si on a d'autres efficiences qu'on peut aller chercher. Donc, on est très intéressé d'entendre les commentaires des ministères. Donc, si vous avez des idées, n'hésitez pas à m'en faire part, là, m'envoyer un petit courriel avec vos idées.
C'est bon, parce que justement, il y avait une question sur ça. Les gens voulaient savoir s'il y avait un mécanisme sur partager un peu des idées ou des recommandations pour améliorer le processus de soumission. Vous pouvez les envoyer directement, Mélanie. Oui, il y a des efforts présentement pour regarder à la modernisation des outils et aussi du processus. Et aussi, justement, cette semaine, on a eu une rencontre entre mon équipe et l'équipe de John parce qu'il y a aussi beaucoup d'analyses de données qu'on peut faire avec les comptes publics, l'analyse des variances d'une année à l'autre aussi. Donc, on a une équipe ici qui aime beaucoup jouer avec les données et justement qui a aidé à un peu simplifier toute l'ingestion des données, des mises à jour du CFMRS qui arrivent quand on prépare et les différentes, des fois, mises à jour des données. Puis, au lieu de faire des analyses et d'obliger de faire des mises à jour répétitives manuellement, on a comme automatisé un peu tout ce processus-là, ce qui simplifie beaucoup, beaucoup l'analyse. Aussi, même les variances, la capacité de regarder les variances puis de facilement identifier les écarts et finalement de juste pouvoir concentrer sur l'analyse ou le narratif au lieu de se concentrer un peu sur le processus de mise à jour puis de regarder la réconciliation. Donc, il y a aussi des efforts. Puis, je suis certaine qu'au sein de vos propres ministères aussi, il y a des façons où vous pouvez utiliser l'analyse des données, peut-être aussi même des mises à jour automatisées pour regarder sur vos analyses d'une année à l'autre, puis la façon de raconter l'histoire à vos CFO et à vos administrateurs généraux sur un peu c'est quoi vos écarts d'une année à l'autre, qu'est-ce qui est anormal, qu'est-ce qui était un peu dans la même grandeur, la matérialité. So, encouraging you to look into how data analytics can help you tell a better story and identify anomalies in the preparation of your public accounts for your departments. I think that there's lots of advancement being done there, and a lot of innovative tools or innovative processes. A lot of departments are using, I think, Power BI to do such things and kind of identify those outliers, so you can tell the story in a little bit more agile way. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, to stay curious and continue to innovate on that front, definitely. So we have a little bit more time, and we have lots of questions from the audience. It's nice that they answered my call when I asked them to go in the chat and join. So question, I don't know if we have the answer. I think this is a tough one. But why do we have so many different coding structures? And so we have the general, the Government of Canada accounting, the GWAC, kind of basically that you have to kind of map to be able to consolidate. And then we have all departments that have chartered accounts that are all different. And why do we have all of these different coding? And, is there a need or maybe a interest to simplify to make that a more effective or efficient process? Don't know, Melanie, if you want to take a kick at this question, or John. This is a bit harder. I think that there's different reasons. A lot of departments have different nature of operations. For example, if you're looking at a D&D department, that probably has to purchase, very expensive equipment or helicopters, or that you probably don't purchase a lot in other departments. So they will need important coding to be able to track that, tell the story. It might be very material for them. And if you're looking for a small department that might have, like unique types. So I think the coding is about telling the right story about your numbers for your department. And then we try to align it to Government of Canada wide so we can tell that broader story to Canadians. But, I'm sure that there's a way to simplify the number of coding structures we have out there. It's just, each department often will have its own system. So kind of a hard objective to get into, but curious to see, Melanie or John, if you have any other insights on that.
Well, I mean, as you've explained, each department has their own reality. Like for us, in terms of the Receiver General to collect the information, we have that chart of accounts, that government-wide chart of accounts that each individual department needs to map to. And we've decided that we are publishing information at this level of detail. So different realities, different systems. I mean, we can eventually see there are some initiatives where some clusters are trying to develop a common departmental chart of accounts to facilitate the transfer when employees are transferring from one department to the other, to have that consistency so they don't have to relearn another chart of accounts or another set of coding as they change from one to the other. There are some advantages of having a very detailed chart of accounts for everybody. Maybe that's something that we can look into for a further modernization. But as it currently exists, there are some differences to basically allow for different realities in different departments.
Exactement.
Maybe I can add just something really quickly there too. I think that's a great explanation. I think to keep in mind is that CFMRS, so that's as known as the Central Financial Management Reporting System set of chart of accounts, is a snapshot. So it only contains a snapshot of the transactions of your individual departments, because arguably there are millions upon millions of transactions that make up the final results of the Public Accounts of Canada. So what we have from a central financial management reporting perspective is just that summary. So we know how much revenue that you've generated as an organization because you supplied that information to us. But what makes up that revenue and all the transactions that are tied to it is information we don't have. So those are retained within departmental financial systems. And I think part of an issue is just maintaining all of that within one area is probably too large. But it's a great suggestion, and I agree 100% with Melanie and Jocelyn in terms of the uniqueness of your departments as well as initiatives looking at this idea. And it's a great question, so I'll leave it there.
No, I agree. And hopefully the audience will recognize that, right? If you had to only align to one and we can only tell the story one way, maybe that would create frustrations, or you wouldn't be able to tell the story or brief up to your own senior leaders about the nature of your activities in your department if what that was mandated. So that rigidity might not serve us well, but maybe there's opportunity to simplify a little bit of how many different coding is in the system. So I think I have time for maybe 2 more questions. And there's this question that is popping up a lot, and it has to do with the Government of Canada's announcement on a new operational expenditure and long-term investment expenditure when we're looking at capitalized expenditure. So will that lead to changes to the public account? So maybe, John, you can speak to that one.
The short answer is no, it will not.
No.
So the Public Accounts of Canada will continue to be presented in accordance with public sector accounting standards. What's being proposed or what is being brought forward by the Department of Finance is to present the budget with this capital versus operating mechanism by which to provide additional insights into what monies are being spent on infrastructure and what monies are being spent on items other than infrastructure.
That makes sense. Perfect. No, and I wouldn't think that we could trump the public sector accounting standards because we have a new framework, right? We have to kind of keep that integrity and the logic behind and the governance that goes. So that makes sense. So thank you for that. There was a quick question about materiality and what the OAG uses and the principle of auditing. So it's important for, upper management to look at internal controls and quality assurance team in terms of that error and reviewing transaction, but as well that kind of materiality. Is there anything in terms of your thoughts? Because I know the materiality the OAG looks at is huge, right? And then when you're looking at departments, the materiality is not of the same order of magnitude, right? So is there something there you can add? And John, maybe?
I think it's a great question, and I've had that question before in terms of, well, John, the materiality. So the materiality that we've assessed, because management assesses materiality, and so does the Office of the Auditor General. So the materiality that we've assessed for the overall Public Accounts of Canada, i.e., in other words, how wrong, for lack of a better way, can the public accounts be? To what point that it actually impairs your ability to make a decision related to the information that's being presented. That number for the Public Accounts of Canada as a whole is approximately $5 billion. So as you may say, wow, well, why are we focused on my one transaction, which is $300? What does it happen in the grand scheme of things? And the reality is it's the law. So the Financial Administration Act requires you to record transactions accurately and appropriately. So that's number one. And although that the public accounts materiality may be very high, it's been seen in the news and in the media and in many other situations whereby which a much smaller dollar value error can result in significant criticism from the public. So we as financial officers, we as those who enter invoices into systems, those in procurement who set up contracts with third parties for products and services, we all have a collective responsibility to ensure that these amounts are recorded accurately and completely. Because without that, we start to lose the integrity of what we're trying to present. Another item I'll present too is that we provide a lot of information in these books, and these books contain a lot of details and a lot of information, and it's not always necessarily at the billion-dollar level. There are some small dollars in there, so I think every single transaction matters.
Thank you, John. I think that's a really good note to leave with, so people understand some of the macro uses and then some of the more micro uses, and as well their role and the importance in that integrity piece that kind of stays at the heart of how the public accounts tell the story to Canadians about taxpayers and that transparency and integrity of our financial system across the public service. So thank you for that. Donc, je vais changer en français. On arrive sur le mot de la fin. Je tiens à vous remercier pour votre belle participation aujourd'hui et pour votre intérêt sur le sujet. Je tiens à remercier sincèrement aussi Mélanie et John. J'ai beaucoup appris personnellement de vos échanges et aussi je dis merci à mon équipe parce que mon équipe elle aide beaucoup avec tout ça. Ils font vraiment un travail merveilleux ainsi qu'avec l'École de la fonction publique. On a été bien outillés et bien appuyés. J'espère que vous avez apprécié l'événement autant que moi. Vos commentaires sont appréciés. Donc, on vous invite à remplir le questionnaire d'évaluation que vous recevrez par courriel dans les prochaines heures. And then the school as well offers so much more. There's a lot of content and some new training as well. So I invite you to visit their website to keep up to date and register on future opportunities. We also have another session on Learning Essential that's going to come to you. I think it's in February. So please stay tuned for that as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for the great event. I think this was really important and sits at the heart of our financial management function, and at the heart, probably as a financial officer, that you all have a role to play in the public accounts. And then as well, you see that this is a lot broader, not just within your department, but a lot of stakeholders across the system, which we obviously learned from today's session. Donc, thank you so much again, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day, et au plaisir de vous voir au mois de février. Merci encore.